On a quiet evening, in the suburban neighborhood of Maplewood Lane, everything seemed calm. Families were settling in for dinner, but at the Parker house, something was very wrong. From the upstairs master bedroom came muffled sounds of a struggle, breaking the eerie silence. Inside, chaos reigned. The usually tidy bedroom was a mess, with furniture overturned and broken glass scattered across the floor. A family photo frame lay shattered, and the bed was stained with dark red patches. On the floor, the body of a middle-aged man was found, covered in multiple stab wounds, a shocking sight that indicated a violent fight had just taken place. The man was Michael Davis, the housewife's father-in-law. He had been attacked in a fit of rage. Nearby, a kitchen knife lay on the floor, covered in blood. When the police arrived, they found Sarah Parker, the housewife, standing in shock near the door. Her clothes were messy, her hair was disheveled, and her hands had blood on them. She claimed it was self-defense, but left out important details about what really happened. Neighbors had started to gather outside, drawn by the noise. They had heard shouting, but no one had intervened, unsure of what to do. Some were shocked, while others were worried about what they might find. Michael Davis was a successful businessman in his early 50s, known in the community for his charm and charisma. On the surface, he presented himself as a warm and friendly man, often the life of the party at family gatherings. His colleagues admired him for his work ethic and ability to make connections in the business world, but beneath this polished exterior lay a darker side. Michael had a manipulative streak that surfaced in his personal relationships. He often used his charm to control those around him, particularly his family. His relationship with his son, Daniel, was strained. They frequently clashed over differing values and priorities. Daniel viewed his father as overbearing, leading to a rift that left Michael feeling isolated within his own family. In contrast, Michael seemed to share a closer bond with his daughter-in-law, Sarah. He provided her with attention and compliments that her husband, Daniel, often overlooked. This dynamic created an emotional dependency that eventually spiraled into a secret and dangerous affair. Sarah Parker was a woman in her mid-30s, married to Daniel Davis. With her striking features and intelligence, she had always been seen as the perfect wife on the outside. However, within the walls of her home, Sarah felt increasingly isolated and unfulfilled. Daniel, a dedicated employee, spent long hours at work, leaving Sarah to manage the household and care for their two young children largely on her own. Despite her attractive appearance, Sarah grappled with feelings of loneliness and entrapment in a loveless marriage. The affection and attention she craved from her husband were often replaced by silence and neglect. This emotional void pushed Sarah into the arms of her father-in-law, Michael, where she sought validation and excitement in their secret affair. As the relationship progressed, Sarah found herself in a web of deceit, torn between her desires and the guilt of betraying her husband and family. Daniel Davis, in his late 30s, was the hard-working son of Michael Davis and the husband of Sarah Parker. He had always been driven by ambition and success, often prioritizing his career over family life. Daniel worked long hours in a demanding job that frequently took him away from home, leaving little time for his wife and children. This commitment to work created a growing emotional distance between him and Sarah, which he failed to recognize. While he loved his family, Daniel struggled to balance his professional responsibilities with personal relationships. His work-focused mentality made him oblivious to the cracks forming in his marriage, and he had no idea about the affair between his wife and father. When the truth finally came to light, the revelation shattered his world, forcing him to confront the harsh realities of betrayal and loss. Anna Brooks was an older woman who lived next door to the Parkers. She was known for her friendly demeanor and keen sense of observation. Often seen tending to her garden, Anna would frequently wave to Sarah and the children. She had noticed the interactions between Sarah and Michael, observing moments of closeness that raised her eyebrows but never crossed the line into gossip. Though she cared for her neighbors, Anna remained unaware of the affair and its potential consequences. After the murder, she would become a crucial witness, providing insights into the relationships within the Davis family. The affair between Sarah Parker and her father-in-law, Michael Davis, ignited at a family gathering under the warm sun of a late summer afternoon. Laughter filled the air as family members chatted and children played in the yard. Sarah, in her mid-30s and feeling increasingly neglected by her husband, Daniel, found herself enjoying the attention of the charming and charismatic Michael, who was in his early 50s. As they prepared the barbecue together, an accidental brush of hands while reaching for a plate sent an unexpected thrill down Sarah's spine. Michael's gaze lingered on her a moment too long, and a flutter of excitement raced through her. Although both tried to dismiss it, their chemistry was undeniable. Over the following weeks, their casual interactions became charged with tension. What began as playful banter quickly spiraled into stolen moments of intimacy. They exchanged knowing glances during family dinners, shared whispers while cleaning up, and soon began meeting under the pretense of running errands or helping each other with tasks around the house. The thrill of sneaking around added an intoxicating layer to their connection. For Sarah, each secret rendezvous was a respite from her mundane life and her increasingly distant marriage. Feeling isolated and yearning for validation, Sarah found comfort in Michael's attention. He filled the void left by Daniel's long hours at work, reminding her of her desirability. Michael was attentive and passionate, showering her with compliments that made her feel cherished. But behind that charm lay a more manipulative side. Michael reveled in the power dynamics of their affair, often reminding Sarah of the consequences if she dared to end it. As their affair deepened, the thrill began to intertwine with a sense of dread. Michael's possessiveness escalated, turning what had once been a secret romance into a suffocating prison. He frequently expressed his desire for her to leave Daniel, saying things like, "We could have a life together, Sarah. Just you and me. But you have to choose." The implications were clear. If Sarah ever tried to break things off, he would expose their affair to his son, Daniel. The pressure weighed heavily on Sarah. Caught between her guilt for betraying her husband and her longing for freedom from Michael's grasp, she felt trapped. She began to experience anxiety attacks, unable to sleep at night, her mind racing with the consequences of her choices. The joy that once accompanied their secret meetings was replaced by a constant knot of tension in her stomach. In an attempt to reclaim her life, Sarah tried to distance herself from Michael. She initiated conversations where she expressed her desire to end their relationship. But each time she brought it up, Michael's reaction was intense and frightening. "You don't understand what you're saying," he would respond, his voice cold and threatening. "You'll ruin everything. Don't you want to be happy?" The way he twisted her words made her question her own feelings, further ensnaring her in his web of manipulation. Sarah confided in a close friend, Emily, about her struggles, hinting at the affair, but omitting the true nature of Michael's threats. Emily urged Sarah to cut ties and focus on her marriage, but Sarah felt paralyzed. The fear of Michael's retaliation loomed over her like a dark cloud, casting a shadow on any hopes of escape. As the weeks passed, the tension between them continued to grow. Michael would show up at her house unexpectedly, his presence igniting a mix of excitement and fear. On one such occasion, Sarah made an attempt to break things off, only to find herself swept back into the whirlwind of his charm and manipulation. The emotional turmoil left her feeling unsteady and confused. On the night of the murder, everything came to a head. Sarah had reached her breaking point, convinced that she needed to end the affair for good to save her marriage. After weeks of internal struggle and sleepless nights, she finally found the courage to confront Michael. She believed that by putting an end to their relationship, she could salvage her life and repair her marriage with Daniel, who she still cared for deeply. However, Michael had other plans. He arrived uninvited at her home, his demeanor unsettling. The atmosphere was charged as they faced each other in the dimly lit living room. Michael, sensing her resolve, began to pressure Sarah, his voice low and filled with urgency. "You don't really want to leave me," he said, stepping closer. "You're just scared. We belong together, Sarah. Don't throw that away." Tension crackled in the air as Sarah's heart raced. She felt cornered, her emotions swirling between fear, anger, and desperation. "I can't do this anymore, Michael," she replied, her voice shaking. "I need to focus on my marriage. I can't keep living this lie." As the argument escalated, Michael's true colors. He raised his voice, revealing the underlying threat in his words. "If you think you can just walk away, you're mistaken. I will tell Daniel everything. You'll lose him, and you'll lose me too." His anger filled the room, and Sarah felt a rush of panic. In a moment of blind desperation, she reached for the kitchen knife on the counter, her mind racing with thoughts of escaping this nightmare. "Stay away from me, Michael," she shouted, backing away, but Michael lunged forward, fueled by rage and betrayal. The struggle that followed was chaotic and frenzied. In a desperate attempt to defend herself from the man she once loved, Sarah lashed out. The blade plunged into Michael, and as he fell to the floor, the gravity of her actions settled in. The excitement and passion of their affair had transformed into a violent confrontation, leaving Sarah standing in the aftermath, a mix of horror and disbelief flooding over her. In that harrowing moment, Sarah realized that their affair, which had once brought her joy and validation, had ultimately led to tragedy. The line between love and hate blurred, and the consequences of their choices echoed in the silence of the room. As Michael fell to the ground, his expression transformed from rage to disbelief. He staggered back, hands clutching his abdomen as he collapsed onto the hardwood floor. The sight of her father-in-law bleeding out in front of her sent Sarah into a state of shock. He gasped for breath, the sound wet and desperate, a haunting echo in the otherwise silent room. Michael's last moments were filled with confusion and betrayal. He looked up at Sarah, eyes wide with shock, perhaps realizing that the woman he had tried to control was capable of such violence. As the life drained from him, Sarah's emotions were a tangled mess. Horror washed over her as she processed the reality of what she had done. She stood frozen, the knife slipping from her grip and clattering to the floor as a pool of blood spread beneath Michael's body. Her heart raced, torn between fear and an unexpected sense of liberation. She felt a chilling rush of relief, mixed with guilt, as she contemplated the gravity of her actions. Had she truly defended herself, or had she crossed a line that could never be uncrossed? Chaos of the moment consumed her, and she fought against the rising tide of panic. As Michael lay dying, Sarah could do nothing but watch, her mind racing with thoughts of what would come next. Would she call for help? Would anyone believe her story? The weight of the moment crashed down on her, leaving her paralyzed in a fog of confusion and horror. When the police arrived, they were met with a scene that would haunt them for days. Sarah stood nearby, her hands stained with blood, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. The kitchen knife lay abandoned on the floor, its blade slick with crimson, a stark reminder of the violence that had just unfolded. Investigators immediately noticed the critical evidence surrounding them. Sarah's fingerprints were smeared on the handle of the knife, but Michael's fingerprints were also present, suggesting a violent struggle. The scene was chaotic, blood splattered across the walls, and the floor painted a vivid picture of the altercation. In the corner of the room, Sarah's phone buzzed incessantly, notifications lighting up the screen. Detectives moved closer and began to comb through her messages, revealing a treasure trove of evidence that would change the course of the investigation. Text messages between Sarah and Michael exposed the depth of their affair, passionate exchanges, plans to meet, and heated arguments over their relationship. The messages painted a picture of an emotional and dangerous entanglement that had spiraled out of control. The combination of Sarah's bloodied hands, the kitchen knife, and the incriminating texts set the stage for what would soon become a complicated investigation. The police began to piece together the events of that night, questioning whether this was truly an act of self-defense or a tragic outcome of a relationship built on secrecy and manipulation. As they collected evidence, they knew they were stepping into a tangled web of emotions, betrayal, and ultimately, murder. As the first responders secured the scene, Detective Jane Roberts arrived, a seasoned investigator known for her keen intuition and no-nonsense approach. From the moment she laid eyes on Sarah Parker, Jane sensed that something was off. Sarah's frantic story of self-defense seemed rehearsed, filled with gaps and inconsistencies that raised red flags in Jane's mind. The chaotic scene painted a different picture than Sarah's claims. Evidence suggested that this wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment attack. There were signs of a violent struggle, and the positioning of the body and the weapon indicated possible premeditation. Jane took a deep breath, focusing on the details. She began to gather information, interviewing neighbors, and looking for anything that might explain what had happened. As she pieced together the timeline, it became clear that the relationship dynamics between Sarah and Michael were far more complex than anyone had realized. Jane knew she had to delve deeper to uncover the truth. Sarah became the prime suspect almost immediately. Taken to the station for questioning, she appeared shaken but resolute, insisting that she had acted in self-defense. As Jane pressed her for details, Sarah's composure started to crumble. Under the pressure of the interrogation, she finally admitted to having an affair with her father-in-law, Michael. This revelation added a layer of complexity to the case, suggesting that emotions had run high that night, but Sarah still maintained that the murder was an accident. Meanwhile, Sarah's husband, Daniel Davis, was brought in for questioning. When he learned about the affair, disbelief washed over him. He struggled to process the betrayal, his face pale with shock. Daniel insisted he could not fathom that Sarah could harm his father, the man he had always looked up to. His loyalty was torn between his wife and his family, and he felt helpless in the face of the unfolding tragedy. As the investigation progressed, some neighbors shared rumors that Michael had enemies from his business dealings. They suggested he may have been involved in shady transactions, which could have led to trouble. Detective Roberts followed these leads, conducting interviews with business associates and digging into Michael's financial history. However, after thorough investigations, these leads fizzled out. There was no concrete evidence to suggest that Michael's death stemmed from anything other than a domestic dispute. The frustration mounted as Jane tried to connect the dots. Each false lead wasted precious time, and the deeper she dug, the more tangled the web seemed. The focus remained on Sarah, but the lack of solid evidence left Jane feeling uneasy. It was becoming clear that the truth was buried beneath layers of deceit and complicated relationships. Just when the case seemed to stall, a breakthrough emerged. Detective Roberts reviewed security footage from a nearby camera that overlooked the Parker residence. To her surprise, the video showed Michael entering the house shortly before the murder, challenging Sarah's claim that he had broken in or attacked her. This crucial piece of evidence contradicted her narrative, suggesting that Sarah may have had time to plan or react differently to the confrontation. Additionally, investigators discovered text messages exchanged between Sarah and Michael on the night of the murder. The messages revealed a heated exchange, filled with emotional turmoil and threats, indicating that their relationship was fraught with tension. This new evidence shifted the focus back to Sarah, raising more questions about her intentions and actions leading up to the murder. With the investigation back on track, Detective Roberts prepared to confront Sarah once again, armed with the undeniable proof that could unravel her story and expose the truth behind the deadly affair. After the shocking events of that fateful night, Sarah Parker was taken into custody, charged with second-degree murder. As she was escorted out of her home in handcuffs, the weight of the accusation hung heavy in the air. Sarah's world had flipped upside down. The woman who had been the center of a scandalous affair was now labeled a murderer. The arrest stirred whispers throughout the quiet suburban neighborhood, leaving friends and neighbors grappling with the shocking news. Sarah's defense team quickly began to build their case. They argued that the murder was a crime of passion, fueled by months of emotional manipulation and psychological abuse from Michael. They painted a picture of Sarah as a woman trapped in a toxic relationship, forced into a corner by her controlling father-in-law. The defense claimed that Sarah acted out of fear and desperation, believing her life was at risk during the violent confrontation that night. The trial commenced weeks later, drawing a large crowd from the community. The courtroom was packed, with locals eager to witness the unfolding drama of the affair and murder that had rocked their town. News crews were present, capturing every moment for the evening news. Tensions ran high as Sarah took the stand, her face a mixture of fear and defiance. The defense attorney argued passionately, emphasizing Sarah's victimization at the hands of Michael. They presented evidence of her emotional turmoil, including journal entries detailing her feelings of entrapment and despair. Sarah's past was dissected in front of the jury, showcasing the conflict between her desire for freedom and her entanglement in the affair. In contrast, the prosecution painted a different picture. They argued that Sarah had meticulously planned the murder to escape her complicated relationship with Michael. They presented evidence of premeditated actions, such as her attempts to sever ties with Michael while still maintaining the affair, and a series of angry messages exchanged between them leading up to the night of the murder. The prosecution portrayed Sarah as someone who had crossed the line, manipulating the situation to her advantage when she took Michael's life. As the trial progressed, more sordid details about Michael's behavior emerged. Witnesses testified about his controlling nature, revealing that he had often belittled Sarah and pressured her into the affair. The defense brought in a psychologist who discussed Sarah's mental state, highlighting the emotional toll of being manipulated by someone so close. The testimony painted a picture of a woman driven to the edge, struggling to reclaim her autonomy while ensnared in a web of deceit and control. Each revelation deepened the drama in the courtroom, stirring sympathy for Sarah. Yet, doubts lingered in the jury's minds about her actions on that fateful night. The complex interplay of love, betrayal, and violence left everyone questioning whether Sarah was truly a victim or a perpetrator. After days of intense deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. They found Sarah guilty of manslaughter rather than murder, believing her claims of emotional distress and the pressure she had endured. The decision reflected the jury's understanding of the tumultuous circumstances surrounding the case, recognizing that while Sarah had committed a crime, it was not as straightforward as murder. As the judge delivered the sentence, 10 years in prison, Sarah's expression shifted from one of despair to a glimmer of hope. Though she was being held accountable for her actions, the sentence was seen by some as a chance for redemption. The courtroom was filled with mixed emotions. Some cried tears of relief, while others wept in anger. The case left a lasting impact on the community, stirring conversations about relationships, manipulation, and the blurred lines between love and violence. As Sarah was led away, the reality of her new life sank in, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another fraught with uncertainty. The days following the verdict were filled with heartbreak for Daniel Davis. The betrayal of both his wife, Sarah, and his father, Michael, weighed heavily on his heart. His world had been turned upside down. The life he had built was shattered. Daniel grappled with feelings of anger, confusion, and profound sadness. He had loved his father, trusted his wife, and now both relationships lay in ruins. In a desperate attempt to escape the pain, Daniel made the difficult decision to move away from Maplewood Lane. He sold the family home, packing up memories that were now too painful to bear. Friends and family noticed the change in him. He became withdrawn and isolated, haunted by thoughts of betrayal and loss. Every corner of his old life reminded him of the love that had turned toxic. Meanwhile, Sarah remained in prison, her life behind bars a constant reminder of her actions. As the days turned into months, she experienced a whirlwind of emotions, ranging from guilt and regret to anger at the circumstances that led her to that fatal night. She had once believed the affair was a way to find happiness, but now she was left alone, fighting to cope with the consequences of her choices. The emotional toll of the murder split the victim's family. Some relatives rallied around Sarah, seeing her as a victim of emotional manipulation and a controlling relationship. They believed she was pushed to her breaking point by a man who had abused his power. They argued that her actions were born from desperation rather than malice, advocating for a lighter sentence. Conversely, other family members were furious. They saw Sarah not only as a murderer, but as a betrayer who had taken a beloved father and husband from their lives. They demanded justice for Michael, feeling that Sarah deserved the harshest punishment for her crime. The family gatherings that once brought joy became battlegrounds of heated arguments, with each side unwilling to back down. The story of Sarah and Michael's affair, along with the shocking murder, quickly caught the attention of the media. News outlets turned the tragic events into sensational headlines, framing it as a love affair gone wrong. The narrative painted a vivid picture of romance and betrayal, captivating the public's imagination. Television shows and podcasts dedicated segments to the case, discussing the complexities of relationships, the psychology behind infidelity, and the violent consequences that sometimes arise. Public opinion became polarized. Some saw Sarah as a tragic figure who fell victim to her circumstances, while others viewed her as a calculated killer who had orchestrated her husband's father's demise to escape her own unhappy life. Online forums buzzed with debates as people passionately took sides. Many expressed sympathy for Sarah, believing she was manipulated by Michael, who had used his position to control her. Others condemned her actions, arguing that she should have sought help rather than resorting to violence. The case sparked discussions about domestic relationships, mental health, and the need for support systems for individuals in distress. Advocates for victims of manipulation and abuse rallied around Sarah, using her story to highlight the dangers of emotional control in relationships. At the same time, those who lost Michael sought justice and advocated for stricter penalties for domestic violence. As the dust settled, the impact of the case lingered in the community. Friends, families, and neighbors were left to grapple with the consequences of a tragedy that began with a secret affair but ended in heartbreak, betrayal, and division.